Hi, good morning, and welcome to the next in the Digital Construction Series as we build up to the Digital Construction Week event, which is happening in London next week. So this is the third of the series that we've been running. So in week one, we spoke about how do you harness the value from data that's held within projects, and how does data drive value for the project. Last week, we spoke about why has there been resistance to change around digital adoption within the industry. And this week, we're going to actually address the elephant in the room, and probably one of the hardest questions that I think most people get wrong in the industry. How do you quantify, measure success and return on investment when deploying technology, software, or any digital transformation project? And this is the bit that ultimately any C-suite exec is going to want to know. If we spend X on technology, what will be the return on investment? So today's topic is going to be quite relevant, I think, because there's going to be lots of conversations around this at Digital Construction Week next week. But today I've got both John Knight from Ascente. John and the team provide smart meter room technology. In the case of construction, they're pioneers in providing the digital site project office of the future. And we've got Dr. Jamie Dupre, who's the CTO of an organization, eDocuments. And Jamie's a data scientist. He's involved in deep data analytics and understanding asset information management and asset information data. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask quite a pointed question to the two guests that we've got here to allow them to introduce themselves, but actually talk about the technology solutions they provide, to contextualize it in how does their technology and their software drive value to their clients, and how do they position this whole return on investment agenda. So I'm going to start with Jamie, because I think one of the key things we're going to talk about today is around data. And Jamie loves data, right? And I think Jamie's going to basically frame the conversation around how does data drive value for clients. So Jamie, just want to introduce yourself, introduce eDocuments, and then talk about how you position the value creation that you offer as part of your solution stack.
Right, thank you, Paul. Yeah, so I'm Jamie Dupre. So I'm the CTO and one of the founders of eDocuments Limited. And like Paul said, I focus on all things data, from the architectural design of the applications through to integrations with third-party software vendors. I look at lots of security and analytics, and I've been doing this for eDocuments have been around for now 25 years. So we really specialize in the digital handover documentation space, so traditionally called operational maintenance manuals. We spend a lot of time looking at asset information models, extracting data from BIM models, and we're really in the weeds with trying to get the most out of data so we can classify it correctly and accurately analyze it and really treat it as kind of a quality assurance process. But ultimately, we're churning out manuals that are going to be used through OpEx to safely operate and maintain a building. So I guess the pointed question was really the ROI. I get asked this a lot, and I tend to try and come back to the simplified approach. And the simplified approach is really, understand the costs, understand the gains, divide one way or the other, and you spit out a number. But that's not at all helpful. The real cost of the data is built of so many things like training, collection of the data, storage of the data, investment in the analysis tools, all the other related expenses. So, and then the question to a principal contractor will be often, do you know the cost of your digital transformation? And they may or may not know that. And it is something you can do, and you can deep dive into the data and you can start to get an insight into that. But the second part of that is really, the second part of the equation is the gains. So how do you evaluate those gains? And the gains can be really, really varied. The obvious ones are increased revenue, but quite difficult to work that out from the data. But if you look at the intangibles, it's things like the competitive advantage it gives you by having that understanding, having improved customer satisfaction, and the other, and there's many other quantifiable gains. But I like to think of it as the tangible and intangible benefits. Putting the eDocs hat back on, there's really two things here. It's well, it might be three actually. It's kind of delivery on time, it's accuracy of the data, and then the competitive advantage bit is probably a mix of compliance with regulations. And I think the other one that's often missed is then when you look back at the data, and the big one that we'll be seeing a lot more of in the future years is actually the improved decision making. That's going to be the big value that people get. So it's really, when you talk about ROI, I think you need to talk about intangible and tangible benefits. But ultimately, it's, comes back to what I keep saying in these webinars, is it all comes back to good digital foundations, and the key to that is, meaningful calculations, and make sure you capture all those events, costs, and gains.
Perfect. Thanks ever so much, Jamie. John, over to you, and I'm going to guess you're going to come at it from a different angle.
Possibly. Yeah, so John Knight, Managing Director of Ascente. Ascente are a specialist distributor of innovative technology solutions for general workplace, with a specialization in construction. We have 13 different vendors that we work with currently. We've got more that we're actually signing at the moment. But I'm going to, in this conversation, I'm not going to be referencing specific technologies necessarily. My personal background is that I've been involved in trying to support the world having digital transformation technology since I got involved with a product called a smart board in 1997. And here we are in 2024, more than 25 years later, talking about digital transformation. So clearly I haven't had a very big impact in that regard. So from the point of view of ROI, I personally always start this conversation by trying to relate it back to the users, because there's this aspirational view of capturing all kinds of data, but if actually the behavior of the users is going to prevent that from happening. And I'm going to reference printing things as an example of this. If I'm set up in a way, and we've specifically been looking at the construction site office, the project offices, where people run their construction projects from. If actually, I don't have a great user experience to bring me into the world of technology, and I'm talking about access to a combination of the right devices, the right types of devices, the ability to potentially be able to hybrid enable my environment, i.e. have great video and audio experiences to connect to remote participants, and the fact that every single element of the construction project can be delivering a digitized experience. What actually happens in reality, we find, is people print stuff off, they get their pen, their red marker pen, they take a photo of what they've just marked up, they zap it across to somebody else on WhatsApp. That's the reality of what we tend to see happening in construction projects still. And there's a line that exists in most construction projects, and the line that I'm referring to is what actually happens day to day when people are trying to build something versus what goes on in headquarters, the mothership, the white collar worker community, who are managing software, understand software, may have university degrees, using laptops and tablets and phones and all the rest of it. And for them, interacting with software is easy. But there's a line that exists, and that line is is a combination of the people who are actually involved in building stuff combined with the subcontractor community that exists in most construction projects. So yeah, so going back to my point about users, if you don't focus on how you're going to get those users into the world of digitization and technology, and focus on the experience that they have, then actually, I'm going to make this really blunt now. Doesn't matter what software you give them, because they won't use it, or only a percentage of them will use it. And that's really important when it comes to the data, because ultimately the visibility of data and the ability to analyze data needs to come from the fact that 100% of what you want to be captured in the form of software is being utilized by everybody that's involved in the project. As soon as you have a few rogue elements to it where people are printing stuff and marking it up with a pen and WhatsApping stuff back to each other, or whatever that might look like, using post-it notes, brown paper. We've been focusing from a software point of view on collaborative planning, or the last planner methodology, which we like because it is a very simple methodology, but it has structure to it, which we believe can enable everybody within a construction project to know what they're doing, tomorrow, next week, ideally up to 2 to 6 week look ahead. And we like that methodology because we think it is simple enough for every single user to participate. But we still see it being delivered using brown paper, post-it notes, bits of card being stuck on walls, as the preferred way of using that methodology. So yeah, it's a slightly different angle, but I am absolutely passionate about the data conversation. But as I say, unless you focus on the tooling, the access to technology and devices for every single user in the project, you're going to struggle to get that meaningful data back out again.
Perfect. Thanks, John. So just to provide a bit of context, so I've been chatting to a lot of, as a digital transformation consultant and advisory, I've sort of tried to lean into the industry to see where they are on their digital maturity. The conversation with most of the digital transformation teams that exist within construction companies today is they know they need it. The C-suite are demanding that they go on this digital transformation journey. But the biggest challenge they've got is, as you say, John, the users actually adopting the technology. And when it comes to technology and software, this is about it's got to come from the top down, because you've got to have an enterprise-wide, company-wide solution, as opposed to point solutions being deployed within each project site office. And when we talk about digital transformation, we're not just, I think the challenge I see in the industry is most people coming to the industry have got the best prop tech solution that's going to solve lots of problems, and they're just selling the software. What no one's really doing is understanding the why, the output, and ultimately what is the business case. And you've got to create the business case before you deploy the technology, so that you can actually quantify that. Did you meet the deliverables that were set out early on within the process? If I break down a project, you've got 3 variables: time, cost, quality. So time is one of the things where, when you look at digital transformation, you're just reverse engineering traditional analog, paper-based, laggard processes, which is systemic across the real estate and the construction industry. So time, I know, Jamie, you're a big advocate of basically how does software and data help condense time? Because time, without going woo-woo and talking about the universe, which I know you like, Jamie, but how does software condense time and create an immense amount of value for clients? And I know you can riff off on this in many different directions, but over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, I'd say we'll try and keep it on track.
Yes.
But I guess again, the sort of standardish question is, what are the significant time savings when generating accurate data? And that's that doesn't really have a good answer. Generating accurate data often results in more time being spent, which is really the inverse of what we're trying to preach here. And why is that? And there's lots of reasons, but it's because quite often the perception is to get good data, I can really quickly just lash something together, fill in this information form, send it over, and that will do. And then this might be at a design or a construction stage when they haven't got the true visibility of what the entire project needs from this data. So what you really need is a really well thought out plan of what data needs to be delivered at the end. And then you start to really get significant time savings, because back at the very early stages, you can visualize errors immediately in your data when you're comparing them with the deliverable that's needed way down the line. So the biggest problem we see is misconfiguration in information requests. And the problem with this is this leads to the original information being reworked over and over and over again. And it's it's so obvious that it drives me crazy that if you're asking incorrect questions, you're going to get incorrect answers. And the industry is completely stuck on that. It doesn't have the visibility of far enough into the future down the line of what the OPEX period needs. We all know it needs to do that, but there's contractual and legal reasons why designers do things, constructors do things, and then when you get to digital handover and OPEX, the view of the world might look slightly different. But my second kind of really big pain point on that is that all this data exists out there. So if you've got massive construction projects, you went through all the design stage, you get into OPEX. What I like to think of is this shoebox model. And if all the information throughout that entire project was thrown into this shoebox, great, you'd have all that information. And there would be changes between design and construction. There would be probably value engineering and cost decision making and legal changes. But if you think of that shoebox, all the information is in it. And that shoebox at the moment is currently spread between probably 200 software products throughout that project. And what you really want to do is you want to distill that down into a sensible number of software products, or you want to be able to analyze that shoebox and get the information, the accurate as-built final information out that shoebox instantly and ignore the rest of the noise. So this is where I think the industry needs to get to. Is the perfect solution for me would be getting to the point where all the software platforms seamlessly connect with each other. And then you've got a very simple way of analyzing what I'm going to trademark as the shoebox model. And the other great thing about the shoebox model, once you then start to think about AI and prompt engineering, great, you've got the model, already there waiting for you. You've got those digital foundations ready for you to do whatever your business needs are coming next. So the time savings, I think, are actually really getting, and this is the direction that eDocuments is traveling in, is your platform might be a database and it might be an editing tool and it might be an intuitive solution, but you really need that collaboration and connection with as much of the kind of other touch points in the industry that are out there around it, so you can get the efficiencies. And I think once you introduce the wider users out there to the fact that you can connect up a lot of these platforms, you then get to the real answer to the question is that the time saving is coming, but quite often the users don't realize how much time they are saving or saved until the very end of a project. But they do know they can do that because they've got this collaboration connectivity through all their data and platforms. And they can pivot at the last moment because you've got this shoebox model where you've actually got access to all that underlying data. You can find that information and insights, hopefully in a friendly format, at any point in time. So that's really the direction that eDocuments are traveling in, and hopefully all this kind of piece on time saving will actually become an automatic sort of kind of no-brainer. Over to you.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, if I just summarize that, I think the challenge is, and we discussed this on previous webinars, is people view this as a cost, which it is a cost in time and also a cost in monetary sense. But it's an investment because the actual return on investment is actually further down the line. And in many cases, the return on investment is actually post practical completion because the value is created in the smart connected building that you build at the back end. But from a construction point of view, because there's a multitude of stakeholders, that's why this agenda is so challenging, because there's no other industry like real estate. There's so many stakeholders involved. So, John, I'm going to hand over to you because, again, I know you're going to come at this from a different angle. What's your thinking around these variables, and do you want to riff off in a different direction to Jamie?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I think if we're referencing those three sort of topics that you talked about at the beginning of this section, Paul, with time and quality, for example, these are important topics, headline topics. But then your ultimate question around these topics would be to identify what's the most important and prioritized elements within it. So, as somebody who's running a business, not a particularly big business, but having that kind of business leader mentality, my only interest in time is, are we delivering the project on time? Are we hitting all of our milestones along the way? PS, sorry to be blunt again, but I don't give two shits how we get there. That's like the ultimate kind of business leader mentality around a conversation about time, productivity, all the rest of it. Yes, I want you to use your time efficiently and I want you to be productive. Now get on with it. That's ultimately where business leaders will be thinking. But of course, the reality of a highly complex project with multiple stakeholders, with multiple subcontractors, and potentially hundreds of people being coordinated to deliver a project, possibly thousands. The reality of all of that, when you sort of throw it into that cauldron of time, is incredibly difficult to actually then start to measure and quantify. This is what we actually like about the collaborative planning tool, which is called Last Planner, as the methodology, because it has measurements in there about the day-to-day tasks that are being set and the percentage completion. And we're working with one particular general contractor who's identified metrics around how they can measure percentage completion as a percentage, and then try to use that methodology as an early warning system around when a project is falling behind. And they're also looking at using it with the management of their subcontractor community as well, and measuring their overall performance. Because if you know whether or not somebody's completed the task they've been set on Tuesday to a level that you're happy with, and you're tracking that over the life cycle of the entire project, then you're going to get a pretty good sense of how reliable they are at completing what they've been asked to do. So again, there's time related to that, with a very simple, day-to-day check-in of, have you done it? Have you not done it? I'm going to track that data. I'm not interested at this stage in why you haven't done it, although you can capture that as well. So reasons for variance, for example. But yeah, I mean, it's just this. It's this sort of, I called it a cauldron earlier. I'm gonna now reference like an onion, for example. You got these different layers that you can go through, where ultimately, as a CEO, I'm just interested in whether or not the project is done on time, on budget. And again, an investor, somebody who's actually commissioning, construction to happen, that's also their ultimate metric. How much is it going to cost me? When can you do it by? I don't really want to know any more than that. But of course, again, the reality is that when you start peeling back the layers of the onion, there's so much complexity to all of this. And the final thought I'll just throw into this is that when it comes to these elements, the quality side of things is definitely an angle that the industry has focused on in the past. Whereas now I think there is a shift towards trying to rationalize, and Jamie referenced 200 software applications being reduced down so that you have the shoebox, patented, copyrighted shoebox approach. And I completely agree with that as well. I see a lot of disparate thinking occurring, disparate tooling, lack of continuity generally. And there needs to be this sort of top-down approach to standardize software, hardware, how we're delivering it, methodologies. Until that happens, the shoebox is always going to have different things in it.
Okay. So, Jamie, am I right in saying that the shoebox is the data lake?
Yeah, really, that's the data lake, and I think the important thing is you don't duplicate any information. It's all just pointers to where the information exists, and then that gives you this exactly a data lake. So you've got one repository that you can go to find your golden thread, your absolute truth, your change over time, the who did what, why, and when around all the decision making. And then exactly as John said, and we do the same. So make sure you can forecast delivery, you can assess quality, you can measure against any standards that have been set in place, you can look at your supply chain and see their performance. It's just having a consistent schemed data model and all the data accessible, really, so you can then make those more informed decisions going forward.
But let me just ask you this question, Jamie. Out of all of your client base, and you may not know the answer to this off the top of your head, but just as a sort of gut feeling, how many of them use the same tools, software tools, on every project they deliver across, the entire year?
So and again, I think it's a function of their preferred suppliers and supply chains. So I know that there's a big initiative. This is principal contractors. So principal contractors work hard to look after their supply chains and keep them happy. And I think that's one of the things that's often missed. Initially, I thought it was probably just all done on cost, but actually keeping good people happy is almost as important when you're looking at these big tier ones. So in answering the question is, yes, they're going to use a lot of bespoke tooling because of their specific needs. And that tooling almost certainly will change on projects where you've got different specialist suppliers and contractors involved. And we definitely see that. So even the BIM modeling tools will vary from project A to project B. And that will create problems for somewhere down the line because the data schemas will be different, or the tools will export slightly differently. Or when you're trying to merge things, they don't merge quite as seamlessly as you hoped. So yeah, it's not a completely consistent software space, but I do feel it's up to the software vendors like myself to say, we're going to make it, we're going to do our very best to make it work. And we're not going to just have APIs, but we're going to have good connectivity between software platforms and other software vendors. So it does vary. I don't think you're going to get away from that because it's a competitive market and people are looking for a competitive advantage. But it's up to the software vendors to try and rationalize, that training and the interoperability, make everyone's lives a bit easier.
So I'm going to reference a different technology example in this, because actually, I personally think that the world of video conferencing, which we're all used to now as a result of COVID, has gone backwards. And the reason that I'm going to reference that is that before Microsoft Teams, you had a whole load of people, massive global companies like Cisco and Polycom, who'd bought into the fact that video technology, the actual video streams that were sent between devices, were standardized. And we've actually moved away from that now. So Microsoft, for example, have entered the market, Zoom as well, which we're using at the moment. And it's exactly that argument about competitive advantage. I want people to use Zoom, and only Zoom as their video platform. So I'm sure some of us have been in meeting rooms, for example, where you've tried to join a Zoom call from a Teams device and you can't do it. And if we're working from home, we're used to just clicking a link on a laptop or clicking a link on our iPhone. But when you're actually using meeting environments where you have a camera and a screen and a microphone system, you've got to have an ability to be able to join that that call, irrespective of which platform it is. So bringing it back to the construction industry, I think there needs to be some kind of overarching drive within the industry to create standards. And if data is this sort of golden thread that every construction project wants to analyze, there needs to be an ability to standardize on some of this data and an identification of which data is critical. Because whilst we remain in a world where competitive advantage rules, the ability to deliver this sort of utopia is going to remain a utopia for the majority of people.
It is, and I think we do see, not all projects, but BIM projects that are run with good, well thought out BIM execution plans and with the asset information requirements clearly defined. They do stipulate all the software that's to be used, including down to the versions. They do stipulate the classifications that are going to be used, such as unit class and what set and what versions. And if people adhere to that, then it goes much smoother. So the trick is actually being to quickly validate when things are wrong. And again, that's one of the big drives of us as a business, is we're putting tooling in place so you can quickly see errors where you've in misconfiguration. So using wrong classifications, using wrong versions of things, using wrong tables of spaces and room names and just basic things. Even having it so designer can see that very early days immediately in the tools that they work with. So like in the Autodesk Construction Suite, they can very quickly validate a model there. It'll query against eDocs, and eDocs will say you've got some errors. So they don't have to go anywhere near the eDocuments platform, but they're getting the telemetry and feedback in their own existing application. And I think that's what we need to see more of, is actually that level of interoperability, helping that designer in that designer's tool that they love and use every day. And I think that's going to be that's where we're going to start to see step gains when, we're very niche, but a wider application of that is definitely, in my mind, is the way forward.
Perfect. And just to pick up on a point, John, that you've said, anyone that's operated in the IT software space understands the fact that commonality of infrastructure, there is a return on investment. Because if you think about, I spoke to an IT director of a tier 1 contractor yesterday, and the conversation it's about, if you don't standardize your technology stack from an IT support perspective, you're screwed. Because if you've got a construction site that's got different technology from different vendors with different integration, different support, the supportability and the ability to be able to support that disparate network is an absolute nightmare. So there's a return on investment from standardization. And if you think about buildings, I mean, I'll always come from the smart buildings hat on. If you think about a construction site like a building, you've got global portfolio of asset owners now that have got buildings that have got different BMS systems, different lighting systems. And we all know that you should just have a standardized system. But each of these systems has different bits of data that gets ingested. And it's an absolute nightmare. If you look at what's gone on with global real estate companies that are forward thinking, they've understood that you want a common architecture in every building, because you can monitor it and support it remotely far more effectively. And the return on investment for the IT department is astronomical. But that's just one ROI model. Talking about data, for me, the data lake conversation, the challenge you've got is everyone's got a SaaS, a software as a service, right? But a SaaS and a software platform does nothing. The term that I'm going to copyright is SWAS, software with a service. And the whole point is, you don't know what the service layer is. The software is a tool, but it's what does that software drive? What's the business value it's creating? So if you look at software, because you can't see it, value is created in the cloud. So that whole data lake, the problem you've got is you've got different software solutions, and the software and the data is held by the software provider. The utopia is, and especially in the smart building spaces, Why is the data pulled outside of the building into other people's clouds and other people's environments? The whole point of a common data lake and a shoebox, as you say, Jamie, is why didn't you just hold the data in the building or in a shoebox in the cloud that is a common environment? And then all of the different organizations that need to access that data, they can go into the shoebox, pick out the bits of data that they need, ingest that data to provide whatever visualization reporting tools they need. And if you look at what's going on, to summarize, if you look at what's gone on in the marketplace, the big tier one contractors back in 2011, when they started to adopt BIM, they started getting technology for technology's sake. And they did exactly what every company does. Early adopters, we're going to buy that solution, that solution, that solution. They've coupled it together. And now what are they having to do? They're having to unravel this shitstorm that they've created because they've got such a big mess. Whereas if you look at some of the innovative, let's say, smaller contractors in the UK, they're in a quite a unique advantage because they haven't got a mess to unravel. They can look at this as with a fresh pair of eyes and go, right, how do we leapfrog the industry by doing things in a much more organized, structured environment? And they're actually going, well, what is the business value that we need to create? And again, the data, the value is in the cloud, right? So the data is the key important, because it's which bits of data do you need? And like for any project, it depends on the region, on the supply chain. Are you building a factory, an office building, a hospital? Is it a highly complex environment or dumb? There's so many variables on there, which is why I think that the whole point, just to summarize, is the thing that's missing in the industry is it's that consultative layer is to ask the horrible questions. Why? Why do you need that data? Who needs that data? What format they need that in that data? When do they need that data? What context do they need that data in? So data isn't the new gold. It's basically data. Everyone talks about data. It's like, well, no, it's like, what do you do with that data?
Yeah,
So
I was going to say that. I was going to just say the new gold in my mind is the data-driven decision making.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to say I'm going to jump back into my helicopter again and try and fly over the top of all this. And I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier, which was my ultimate metrics, if I'm running a business, would be, are we winning more projects or are we completing projects on time? And what's the prioritization conversation around the data that is critical to track that? So, for example, most construction projects have a plan that is created at the bid phase, and that plan has a set of milestones within it. If we don't build the foundations by this date, we can't then start building the walls, for example. You can tell that I don't actually know what I'm talking about when it comes to building anything, but that's not the point. So, I still think there's the high level stuff where it's like, in order for us to try and complete the project on time, how do we track that? Let's just focus on that for now. Yeah. And then this is where there's this prioritization conversation, because then you can start to go down. So it's almost like you've got to start with the problem statements. What is it that that is the critical stuff that if we don't have an understanding of this, we have no visibility of what's really going on within the project. And then you can go down from there. But actually, the problem that I think the industry currently has is that everybody's drilling down so fast that they're actually not standardizing on the high level stuff. And so therefore, going down through all these different layers of prioritization and saying, yeah, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. We've got 150, 250, 1,000 different bits of data or things that we're tracking. But actually now we've got this mess that we've got to try and unpick. And I think if you just go right back to the top again, back in the helicopter, and just go, well, what is the critical stuff that we absolutely need to know? And it's this point around hitting milestones and completing on time, which I think is the critical element to start with. And the other thing that we haven't discussed, but I think it is very important, is this whole point around why smart buildings were created in the first place was primarily focused around a drive towards the environmental side of things and net zero. That was the actual ultimate goal, and obviously that's still very much an agenda for the world. China doesn't seem to agree with it, but that we're trying, controversial. Yeah, we're trying to drive towards this aspirational goal of net zero, and smart buildings are obviously part of that agenda. But yeah, that's the other side of things, is just the going back in the helicopter. Are we actually trying to do stuff because we're trying to make the planet a better place for all of us to live in and solve climate change, etc.? But anyway, probably lots to unpick there, but that's my two pennies worth.
Okay, so I've got look, the whole agenda around smart connected buildings is that 40% of global carbon comes from the built world, right? Why is that? It's because of the construction real estate industry doing what they've always done. If you always do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. Dumb, unsophisticated, energy hungry buildings. So conversations with main contractors that I've had in the recent months are, if you look at the old ways, we'll build your building really cheaply, really effectively, really quickly to optimize your limited budget. Smart main contractors now are sitting with the board of their clients and saying, yeah, okay, I've seen your specification, but we're going to have a different conversation. We're actually going to build it in a different way. We're going to build it, and it might be a little bit more expensive, right? But we're going to build it in a more sophisticated way that basically means it's going to be repeatable and scalable. Those organizations are basically saying, we're not going to build one building for you, Mr. Asset Owner, Developer, or Real Estate Investment Trust. We want to build all of your buildings. And that's a different conversation. And I just think the market here this isn't about building one building and then another building and another building. This is about just using common sense, and don't do what the building schools for the future did with taxpayers' money. They built, I don't know, let's say 1,000 schools. Each school had a different architect. It had a different professional team. It had a different main contractor, a different building services contractor. You had 1,000 bespoke buildings, taxpayers' money. In hindsight, you should have just had one design with like blocks, 3 different variations, same doors, same windows, same lights, same wireless access points, same HVAC, same BMS. Why? Repeatable, scalable, supportable, and far more energy efficient. We have to reverse engineer and unpick a lot of the tradition that sits within the supply chain. And value is a whole value is a very complex subject. So I'm going to wrap up there because I know we can talk for ages. We've got Digital Construction Week coming up next week. I'm going to be a bit of a voyeur. Over those 2 days, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to see what conversations are going on. I'm going to see if the conversation's different, or if it's the same old bullshit that's been happening year and year and year and year. Is it the same old conversations, or have the rhetoric changed? I think we're going to do a follow-up to Digital Construction Week in 2 weeks' time. And I think that's going to be quite an interesting conversation, because we've been talking about what we think should happen. We're going to experience actually what is really happening in the marketplace next week. And then we'll do a bit of an autopsy to say, okay, where is the maturity of the construction industry? Because it's talking the talk, is it walking the walk? And I think it's going to be quite interesting. So any final points that people want to talk about? Jamie, any parting points? John, any parting points before we close today's webinar?
No, I'll be talking at Digital Construction Week. So that's probably the parting point.
And John,
we've got a stand in the main exhibition hall under the name of Ascente. We'll be showcasing a lot of our technologies and how they can be utilized together to deliver better user experiences. And ultimately, if you solve that problem, as I said earlier, if you can solve the user experience challenge, then you stand a much greater chance of capturing the meaningful data that you're going to want across your entire business. So yeah, come and see us on the Ascente stand.
Well, if anyone, I'm going to be there for the 2 days. I know both eDocuments and Ascente are going to be there for 2 days. We're going to really try and push this whole agenda. So if anyone wants to meet up, just drop me a line or just drop Jamie or drop John a line, and I'm sure that we can have a cup of coffee, chew the fat, and put the world to rights. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope you found value in today's webinar, and then we will catch up in 2 weeks' time and do an autopsy of Digital Construction Week to see where the market really is in its maturity around digital adoption. Thanks ever so much. Bye for now. Actually, there's a link below here if anyone wants to book a meeting, but I will send it out on the post on the post webinar follow up. Thanks ever so much. I'll catch up with you all shortly. Bye for now.